Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
Good evening and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney.
And I'm Craig Freeman. Post-secondary education is one of the most significant components of economic development in Louisiana. Yet it is also one of the sectors most at risk for state budget cutbacks. Reductions in funding over the last 14 months and a looming budget crisis in 2012, when stimulus dollars disappear, is placing increased pressure on higher education to significantly change how it operates.
Well, the chairman of Louisiana's Higher Ed Policy Board recently said, higher education is at a crossroads in the state. We can either do things differently in a way we think best serves students, or status quo and fall off the budgetary cliff when the federal stimulus money runs out. Tonight we explore some of the proposals for how higher education can do things differently and the challenges and opportunities it faces in the future. While spared a reduction in funding in the governor's proposed budget, state colleges and universities may be facing $84 million in additional cuts for the current fiscal year. Pressure is mounting to make significant changes to the way higher ed institutions are governed and funded. Barry Irwin is with the government watchdog group Council for a Better Louisiana.
The budget is dictating really a lot of questions, a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about what higher education is going to look like in the future. Can we afford it the way that it looks right now? Does it need to be downsized? Does it need to be retooled in some ways, rebalanced between community and technical colleges and four-year schools?
Here's the problem. In a little more than a year, the state has cut higher education by more than $250 million. In addition, federal stimulus money will be gone in less than 2 years. As Irwin puts it,
you're talking about a cut of more than a third to the higher education budget over about a 3-year period. That's huge.
The first part of the fix was creating the Postsecondary Education Review Commission, also known as PERC. State lawmakers approved the board last year. Members were charged with finding ways to streamline higher ed in order to help universities and colleges produce better results. PERC's 22 recommendations focus on dramatically improving graduation rates, aligning school curriculums to meet the needs of the state's workforce, enhancing tuition policies, and reevaluating the way colleges and universities are managed. How will recommendations by PERC to change the governance and funding structures impact post-secondary education? Dr. James Wharton is a member of the commission.
My opinion is that if the state were to adopt all of the PERC recommendations, that it would make a vast difference in higher education in Louisiana.
According to the Council for a Better Louisiana, the state's graduation rates are among the lowest in the nation. Louisiana's most recent 6-year graduation rate is 37%, compared to 53% for all southern states.
In Louisiana, we have an exceptionally high enrollment in our four-year institutions, which is costly to the state, and we're not producing the workforce needs, the occupational credentials that need to be produced. And so all of those PERC recommendations are interrelated to one another.
Randy Moffitt is the president of the University of Louisiana system.
If you look at Louisiana and the number of persons in the state that hold baccalaureate degrees, we're really an undereducated state. I think the figures will vary, but they're somewhere between 25 and 28% of our population hold a bachelor's degree. And we have a lot of the population who have college credit but have never attained a degree. So I think first and foremost, we have a primary role for those students that come to our universities to move them through and have them graduate.
PERC is calling for all four-year colleges to increase their 6-year graduation rates by at least 50%. Under the proposal, LSU would have to raise its graduation rate from 66% to 75%, while Louisiana Tech and the University of New Orleans would have to go from 52% and 44% respectively to 60%. LSU Chancellor Mike Martin says focusing on graduation rates is important, but there must be a balance.
You don't want to drive graduation rates at the expense of the quality of the educational experience. So there is that balance. You don't water it down to ensure that people go out the other end with a piece of paper. But having said that, I believe there are many things we can still do. In our case, I think it has helped that we have admission standards, though I think the admission standards are about right. But we also have to track the students, keep them motivated, offer enough sections and majors for them to get out, provide other incentives for them to move appropriately through the system.
Governor Bobby Jindal has announced that his administration will push for the Louisiana GRAD Act during the next legislative session. Currently, Louisiana is the only state that requires a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate for any university to raise tuition. The Louisiana GRAD Act would allow those institutions that volunteer to participate the authority to raise tuition 10% each year until they meet the Southern regional average. In return, those schools would have to reach certain performance goals.
We need to be accountable. Let the record show. I'm not trying to shirk our responsibility to be responsible and accountable. At the same time, if we're going to compete on a global stage with other great universities, we have to have the same kind of latitude. So I'm looking forward to some reforms that will give us a chance, within the context of being accountable, to be more innovative, to be more adaptable, to be more nimble, and therefore, I believe, be more successful.
Joe May is president of the Louisiana Community and Technical College System.
And what I think was good about the PERC review was that it really focused on the needs of individuals, what we need to meet the needs of business and industry, and help grow the economy overall. And certainly an important player in that are going to be the role of two-year colleges, technical colleges and community colleges.
In fact, both PERC and the Louisiana GRAD Act call for enrolling more students in community colleges. But there is still the very real problem of being able to transfer credits from one institution to another. As Barry Irwin points out, that should change very soon.
Last year during the legislative session, a bill was passed, a law was passed that was going to require basically all the parties to get together and come up with these articulation agreements. And they're in the process of doing that. And I think by the end of this year, we should be in a position where, for the most part, and maybe completely, that wherever you go to an institution in the state, particularly we're talking about those first couple of year courses, they will transfer from one institution to another.
Another controversial recommendation by PERC is the creation of a single governing board for four-year schools. Rolf McAllister is the CEO of the Baton Rouge Business Report. He says a single board isn't a utopia, but believes it could help the state move forward.
I think that when you have multi-boards, you have teams, and teams compete. Whereas a single board would represent one team, the Louisiana team, and people would work together to come up with solutions and not be pitted against one another. And trust me, as a former board member and chairman of the LSU Board of Supervisors, I saw that year after year, competition at the legislature, fighting for the dollars, and often you were pitted against the other systems. So I've seen it the way it is, and it can be better.
Irwin says a single board could be very problematic.
And this one's going to make it, I think, very difficult to have all of the functions of management for 14 four-year universities, ag centers, law centers, research institutions like Pennington, and the hospital system all run by one board.
Randy Moffitt.
Well, I'm not sure that governance is the end-all solution to improving higher education. You'll always hear those of us in higher education say funding makes a lot of difference. I think funding does. But I think we also have to be more efficient in how we use our dollars. We have to target our activities.
Finding the right fix for the future of higher education in Louisiana is certain to be at the center of many heated debates. But as Barry Irwin points out, the train is moving and there's no turning back now.
Over the foreseeable future, the next several years, higher education is probably headed for a period of perhaps profound change.
Well, joining me to discuss that profound change are our audience members. They include Baton Rouge area residents who were randomly recruited and surveyed for us by LSU's Public Policy Research Lab. We also have students from Louisiana State University. Of those who responded to our pre-show survey question about party affiliation, 50% identify themselves as Democrat, 21% as Republican, and 16% as Independent. When asked about the amount of attention state government focuses on higher education, an overwhelming majority of those surveyed, 82%, say not enough attention is given. 10% say the right amount of attention is given, while 2% think that too much attention is paid to higher education by state government. Of those expressing an opinion about a proposal to allow colleges and universities to increase tuition without legislative approval, a slight majority, 48% of respondents, oppose the idea, while 42% support it. When asked about the duty that the state has in making sure qualified students are able to attend college, regardless of their ability to pay, 60% feel that it has a very big responsibility, and 27% say some responsibility. But 5% say not a lot, and 7% say no responsibility at all. And so let's start there. As the cost of higher education continue to grow, how much of those costs should be shouldered by the state, student, or institutions? Who should pay for higher ed? Should students pay? Should the state pay? Press.
I think the state has a responsibility to its citizens to educate them. There are many people in this state who can't afford an education, even at the community college level. So I think the state has a responsibility to see to it that people have an opportunity to go to school.
Should it pay for everybody? Should we say, if you get out of school and you can get into a college, a community college, or a four-year institution, we'll pay for your education? Joseph?
I think that's ideal, but not realistic. I really think, in reality, it's going to be streamlined in the future. And I would like to see a lot of the core curriculum shift to community colleges. Go ahead and get that done, and let the university downsize and focus more on the expertise teachers. And
okay, so we've got some problems with how we pay and also what we're paying for. And so, I know some people said that we've got a lot of universities here in the state of Louisiana. Do you think we should cut those, Martine?
I feel that as a student, I'm willing to pay for my education. I know as a student at LSU, I get a bang for my buck, to say. And in comparison to what other students are paying to get the same education I'm receiving, I really am getting a deal. So I'm willing as an LSU student to increase that. However, if I'm going to increase how much I pay for my education, the state has to meet me halfway, because we're doing our job and fulfilling our end of the deal, but they need to be doing the same thing.
Should the schools have the ability to adjust tuition? Should, one school say, well, we are more attractive and so we want to charge more, and another school say we want to lower tuition some? Shakisa?
I think the school should not be responsible or should not have that power to raise or lower tuition. I think it should stay with the legislative, because it can get political as far as if we raise it, where is it going to? Because a lot of times, as a graduate student at LSU, just in 2 years, the tuition has gone up in those 2 years, but I don't see how the funds are allocated.
Oh, okay, and that's another issue. I mean, a little bit of an issue is, well, how do we spend our money? And so, there's a notion of the state spending some money, but there's also an issue of how the universities spend money. Do you think that we've got more to trim? Do you think that we can cut some fat from higher ed without damaging what the services that students get? I see you shaking your head.
I don't. I just feel as though we're already as lean as we can possibly be, and if we continue to cut, we're going to start losing the faculty. And how are we going to continue to have excellence and continue to excel our universities and the education of the youth that are supposed to be the future of our state if we're not funding? And I think that's one of the biggest concerns we have to consider.
Elaine, I saw you nodding your head too. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've got to keep our students in Louisiana. We've got to make sure that they have the ability to attend universities. Now, those that have the ability, that families that are, come from wealthy families and can pay the tuition, then no, the state should not pay their funding. But I mean, I've got a granddaughter that's fixing to start at college. If she doesn't get TOPS, she can't go.
Kathleen?
Well, I was just going to bring up the point. There's different ways you can raise money at universities. One's through academic fees, which the student pays for without any scholarship usually, and one is through tuition. And usually, I think 90% of freshmen at Louisiana schools have the TOPS. And if it's not raised through the tuition, then a lot of students are going to be having to come up with that money out of their own pocket. And that, I think, is a bigger issue as to how to raise the funds. Is it going to come directly from the students' pockets, or is it going to come from TOPS, which is essentially through the government?
So we've got a problem about who pays. We've got a problem about how much we pay.
Just a comment, and that is maybe 90% of the students at LSU may have TOPS, not at the other schools in the state.
Okay.
That is a misnomer.
Well, shouldn't we consolidate? I mean, shouldn't we have a couple, less schools? And that way, if you are, if you want to pay a little less and go to a community college for your first 2 years, or save some money, then maybe that's a way to alleviate some of those problems. Andy?
We cut $250 million this year. Is that what?
Yeah.
And you think we're going to get a raise next year? You think they're not going to continue cutting the budget? I think they will. As far as who pays, whether the state pays or the person pays, I believe there are a lot of people who can pay for their own education. I believe that we have to balance things out because there are a lot of people that cannot afford to pay. And I think it is our obligation, the state's obligation, when you get into the lower income class families, to pay for that. Now, we are failing. I just met this young lady, Kathleen, a little while ago. She's at LSU. I asked her, said, what are you studying? She's biology, geology, and she's going to be a professor.
Hopefully.
And so I have a friend of mine that goes to Southern Law School. Today she told me, she said, everybody was in a panic. They're having an assembly tomorrow because of the budget cuts, and teachers are going to lose jobs. How does that make you feel, hearing that kind of information I heard today?
Well, that makes me very worried.
So we've got to keep the good professors that we have here. We've got to get the next generation of professors through. But how do we pay for it? Mariano, you looked a little concerned when we talked about splitting TOPS.
Well, I remember when TOPS first was proposed. It was supposed to help those that were ready for college, qualified for college, and not able to pay for it. And it got corrupted along the way by our legislature, who says, if we're going to do it for some, we got to do it for all. And it was all politically blown up, something that should have cost $15 million a year, and now is over $100 million a year. That is where your costs go up. We don't have means testing. We need means testing, the income means testing, and there you can achieve quite a bit of savings and return to the purpose for which the program was intended.
So we're spending too much money on tuition for education. If we spent the same amount of money but could allow more students that needed to go, then maybe that's a better solution?
Yes, it is. It is. I think that the state required to continue to help the students that are unable to pay to go to college, So I think they're required to go ahead and pay for that.
No, my concern is sometimes some students aren't ready to go to college.
That is true.
Do we need to pay for every high school student? Do we have an obligation to make sure that every high school student goes?
That's actually something that I really think is important. I mean, you just showed some statistics about college dropout rates. And as far as I know, TOPS pays for these students that drop out and nothing happens. So we lose so much money through that. And I think maybe TOPS should be more geared as, maybe viewed as a loan that you won't have to pay back if you get a diploma. But I think people who drop out of college should pay the money back to the government who essentially just didn't use it.
So we're going to claw back money from our students that don't go? Tyler, you look a little...
Well, I think the state has an obligation to help its citizens in whatever way it can. Of course, that has to be addressed with some element of realism. And I think there needs to be a strong merit-based aspect to whatever solution is decided upon to help students. There has to be a give and take. There can't be, in any of this, there can't be just money shelled out to people who can't guarantee or in some measure demonstrate that they're worthy of that. And of course, this entire thing has to be comprehensive with restructuring the system itself. But I think encouraging performance in high school, using and stressing that is an important part of improving the quality of students as well as improving our investment in students.
Ron?
My daughter was one of those, let's go to LSU for 2 semesters and we'll see you when you're ready to play again. Enjoy Tiger Band and all the good things that go with it, but if it's not my full knowledge, she could have laid out, she didn't have to start the spring semester or the next year, for the winter semester the next year. She could have chosen to lay out a year and when she got a little more maturity under her belt and whatever, then start. And as far as lower income folks or upper income folks, that's, wow, yeah, I kind of waffle back and forth. You know, is it not a little bit of discrimination? Are you going to discriminate against a lawyer's kid or a doctor's kid who got the same straight A's as a lower income person and did the same thing? I mean, it's kind of harsh, but, and then the other thing is, well, if all the money goes to the rich kids, then the poor kids don't get it. So I really don't know how I feel about it. You waffle back and forth sometimes.
Angela.
Well, I would start off by saying it seems like it's more targeted towards the finances. So if the tuition is steady increasing, yeah, the state should help. But if they lower the tuition so that some kids can't afford, maybe some of the responsibility can go on the students as well.
Well, you guys have some great ideas. We're actually going to get some experts in to actually talk a little bit more about what things we can do and answer some of your questions. And so when we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further discuss higher ed challenges and opportunities. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. We're discussing higher ed challenges and opportunities in Louisiana. Joining us now is our panel of experts. State Representative Jim Tucker is a Republican whose district includes Jefferson Parish and the West Bank of Orleans Parish. House Speaker Tucker has pre-filed legislation this session to grant colleges and universities tuition authority. Dr. Sally Clausen has been Louisiana's Commissioner of Higher Education since 2008. As Commissioner, Dr. Clausen has spearheaded the creation of performance-based funding formula which rewards outcomes for all 2- and 4-year universities. State Senator Ben Nevers is a Democrat who is serving his second term representing Bogalusa. Nevers serves as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Education and was a member of the PERC panel. Jennifer Pike is research director for the Public Affairs Council of Louisiana, or PAR. PAR has published numerous higher education reports over the last several years, including studies on tuition, fees, and governance. Tony Clayton is the chairman of the board of the Southern University System, one of the state's 4 post-secondary education systems. Mr. Clayton is also the senior partner in the law firm of Clayton and Fruget. Let's go to our participants for their questions. And I think, Mariano, you had a question for us about where do we go next?
Well, I would hope that in the performance of your jobs and duties that you would be constantly identifying what we're doing right. Also that you'd be identifying those things that we're not doing very well and we maybe need to change, and that in making those changes, we'll do things differently to make things better. I would hope that that would be your guiding way of doing your work. We talk about energy savings all the time. What are you doing to get together to find out what the other institutions are doing to save energy, the cost of energy, the high cost of energy?
Are there best practices that we can identify that we can use to kind of streamline government moving forward or education moving forward?
Certainly. First of all, I want to thank you for saying find out what's right about government, just like you find out what's right about your children or your family. And secondly, when you do find out what may be needing improvement, you're asking us to look at best practices all over the country. And that's what we've been doing from the Board of Regents. We've been looking at best practices. Just recently, in this past year, I'll reflect back on something historical in a minute, but I'm sitting next to the senator who has actually led best practice through the legislature, ensuring that all students who receive a 2-year associate's degree are able to transfer to any 4-year institution in the state. That's historical. That is absolutely historical for our country. And we have been recognized by the U.S. Education Secretary, by Southern Region Education Board for the comprehensiveness of this legislature and for focusing on students.
Senator, what kinds of things are we doing to make that work a little bit better?
Well, I think we have a lot of great things going on in Louisiana, and we've been recognized nationally for those things. But I do think there's some improvements that can be made, and we've been talking about graduation rates. We've been talking about better efficiencies out of our universities, colleges, and our K-12 system. I believe that education is a cornerstone for this state. I believe it's the greatest economic engine that we have here in this state, and it's more or less a 3 three-legged stool. One is our K through 12 system, one is our technical community college system, and the other is our four-year university system. All of them have to be solidly working together and molded together in order to produce the future workforce for Louisiana.
And David, you had a question about...
Well, let me ask this. Because we're talking about budget cuts, it's in the news, and we want our colleges to be the best. Now, let's just talk about status quo if we're going to have all these budget cuts. How are we going to maintain status quo with these budget cuts? How can we do that?
Jennifer?
Well, you know, I have to commend Senator Devers and Representative Tucker along with the governor. And under the leadership of Dr. Clausen, they've called us all in, all of the universities, and now we're beginning to implement programs to, for lack of a better way of putting it, to get rid of the status quo. We are going to have to cut, and we're going to make some serious cuts, Mr. Marino, as it relates to energy. We have to look at cogenerations, getting generators for these campuses and things of that nature so we can cut back costs. Get our engineering department at Southern to come up with solar energy so that we can find alternative ways in cutting our costs from that perspective. But as for the status quo, these guys have done a great job of calling all of us in, and I think you'll see from the PERC recommendations that we in the state of Louisiana are moving in the right direction. And after this legislative session, I think you're going to see some major cuts. So Southern University will not look the way it looked or the way it looks today, nor would LSU and nor would any of the other institutions. So these guys are serious about moving this state forward as it relates to education, and I think you as taxpayers would be proud of all of us rolling up our sleeves and going to work. So I can't tell you in details, are we going to cut this and cut that? That's what Dr. Clausen and the rest of these folks have called us to the table and say, hey, if you do well at this, if you do well at nursing, then we want to go with you. If you're not doing so well, let's cut that program. No more duplication. So you're going to see major work done from the campuses and the legislature throughout this next 3 or 4 months.
Ms. Pike, is that the kind of stuff that our research shows? Are we moving in the right direction?
Well, for a long time we've known that the status quo is not acceptable and that we need greater coordination among the systems, among the institutions. PAR has recommended a stronger Board of Regents. We've recommended some corrections to the statutes and to the Constitution.
You misunderstood my question. I said, how can we maintain status quo if we're going to have budget cuts?
I would argue that status quo is not the goal, that greater coordination and greater efficiency.
I'm not saying I want status quo. I'm saying how can we have that if we're going to have budget cuts? How can we improve education if we're going to cut the budgets in all the universities? That's a question.
Let me just say that first of all, there are some efficiencies that we can all take advantage of throughout our systems. And I mentioned the 3 systems. I believe that it's incumbent upon us to be as efficient as possible. But at the same time, we must make education the top priority in this state, and we must fund it appropriately, whatever that number is. And I can tell you it's a shame that many of our students have been led to believe they're not going to have professors and they're not going to have the classes that they need, and that we're going to cut out things that are very important to education in this state. That's not what I think the legislature is trying to do, nor the governor or certainly the Board of Regents and management boards. But I can say to you that as we looked at higher education through the Perk Commission, which I'm very proud to have served as chairman, and certainly we would not have had that legislation without Representative Tucker, we did find some efforts that are duplicative across our state. We have found some ways that we can be more efficient, and I thank Dr. Sally Clausen and the management boards for agreeing that we can find better ways to utilize the funds we have. But I assure you, there's no effort in my, to my knowledge, that would reduce the quality of education in this state, and that would not offer everyone that's capable of attending a post-secondary education institution, from technical college to 4-year universities, the opportunity to do so.
And Ms. Pike, we didn't let you finish your answer as well, and so I wanted to make sure we came back to you. You had some recommendations about what the research showed?
Well, first of all, we think that the Board of Regents should be made stronger to enforce some of the changes that we've been recommending for a long time, some of the moves away from the status quo, which would achieve greater efficiencies, such as forcing the enrollment shift away from a heavy dependence on four-year enrollments moving students into the 2-year system, it would be a more efficient way to provide public education to a significant portion of the student population, while also hopefully improving the outcomes for students. Because if you start them out at a level where they can achieve early on, they're more likely to stick with it and finish school. So that's just one of many efficiencies that can be gained when the institutions and the systems are forced into changing the way that they've always done things. And we think that it takes strong leadership from the top, from the coordinating board, in order to force that change.
And that's where you get the savings. The 2-year schools operate at a much lower cost basis than the 4-year schools do. So if a student goes to get their core 60 hours taken care of at the community college and then goes on to the 4-year school, there's a significant savings there between the 2-year and the 4-year schools to provide those core hours. That's one thing. Then the other thing that Dr. Clausen has put in place is performance-based funding, which is having an immediate impact. In Northeast Louisiana, at Tech, at ULM, at Grambling, at the community college, all within 30 miles of each other, they all have a nursing program. Well, is that the smartest way to spend taxpayers' dollar, to have 4 different programs within 30 miles of each other? Those are the kinds of things that the Commission...
That's an important program.
Well, a nursing program...
If you live 35 miles on the other side of that city and you close that nursing program, then that person has to drive 70 miles to get to a school.
But the problem is you can't
and
have a nursing...
My daughter graduated in nursing.
You can't
it's not a simple commute. It's a very difficult program.
Well, David, let's let the representative...
Well, I'm just talking about closing nursing programs.
No, what I'm talking about is moving and consolidating to have the best nursing program in Northeast Louisiana possible, as opposed to spreading those limited resources over 4 different programs. Now, where it is, that's for the program to decide. But we can't have a nursing program every 35 miles apart from each other because it's a difficult commute. You've got to put the limited resources we have to make the best program we can possibly have somewhere in the state, preferably where you serve the most people. And for those who can't do that, we have to have, and we do have in place, aid to get them there, to get them to stay there through TOPS and staying in the dorms and that kind of thing that makes those kinds of things work more efficiently. And so status quo is not acceptable. Status quo is not acceptable. We've made a lot of improvements over the last 3 to 4 years in both funding and in improvements in the systems. But when you look at graduation rates and when you look at some of the other things that we are gauged by our peers, we're not there. And so now we have to look at the next level of improvement to get us there. We want, and Dr. Clausen has led this since I've known her, and that is, in the PERC Commission picked up on this, we want to have a goal. What is our goal? Our goal is to have 10,000 additional certificated or degreed individuals by 2015 coming out of our existing systems. To work toward that goal, you have to do some of the implementation that we're talking about, both at the PERC Commission level and at the legislative level, so that we have more people who are actually achieving those goals. Not just going to school. I mean, we've got plenty of people going to school, but they're not graduating. Well, what good is that? Most of them are coming out with debt. And now it's bankruptcy remote under the federal laws. So that's not the way to run the railroad, and we're trying to do better with what we've got.
And Bertha had a question about maybe using some new technology to move the railroad forward.
Heard one of the possibilities was online classes. Yes. That kind of scares me for undergrad, because when I was an undergrad, I needed all the help I could get. You know, I need all that nurturing from a teacher. Of course, I went to a junior college. I'm from Texas. And so I had the small classes. So, I mean, when people are going to start college, they need that nurturing, so that concerns me.
I think that's a good point. We're not saying online learning in lieu of nurturing. In fact, students come to us today and they're so tech savvy, they're expecting to have instant feedback. They're teaching some of us how to use the technology that's very current. And what we have found is that we can teach more students with more contact hours and with deeper content, such as college algebra, which is one of the areas that we find that we lose students because they get very discouraged. But if we use technology in the classroom, and we use students that are very content savvy in that school, like graduate students, students get instant feedback. They can put a light on the top of their computer and say, I have a problem, let me get an answer right away. We have found from faculty that they can teach more students in less time, with students having deeper content knowledge and at less cost. Now, if we can do that with one of our courses, doesn't mean that it'll apply to all courses across, But if we can do that with 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 20 of our courses, we can reduce the way that we re-engineer ourselves, the way that we deliver services. And we found that those students that are in this transformational academic program actually move faster. So they're getting instant feedback. The nurturing is a little bit different because it's instant, and then they can email their professors later on in the middle of the night. It's just an amazing world that students are living in today, very different from ours.
Ms. Bertha, to piggytail on what she just said, I was at a function up in Washington, D.C., and particularly dealing with minorities. Less than 20% of minorities have computers in their home, but 90% of minority kids have smartphones or cell phones. And it's my understanding that you can create an app for anything. You can create an app for algebra, and you can give this kid that app on his smartphone and say, we can help you grow with algebra. So the commissioner is right on point in terms of the online piece, that if we were to focus a little bit more on it, it'll help Mr. Davis' daughter, who may not want to commute that 75 miles if she can take classes twice a week per the internet, per the online. So it's the way of the future, particularly with the digital divide and things of that nature. I think Louisiana has to look toward enhancing its online services so that we can cut costs in terms of in other arenas.
What about cheating? Could somebody, is there a face contact? Is there ID so that you...
Absolutely.
So Joe Blow isn't doing it for Sam? Whatever. Absolutely. Because that also concerns me.
All of that is private, and only the owner owns his ID. So it's up to the owner to not share it, of course.
You see my concern.
Absolutely.
Because we're doing testing. You can't bring a cell phone on campus at all during testing. So.
But if I'm a scoundrel.
You see that we're talking about failure. You got most of the people LSU that graduate from Louisiana go to Houston and Dallas. My question to you is how can you rationalize a $230 million cut and expect for us to have a good economy, want to bring jobs into our state, want to have this young lady stay in our state and raise a family? How can you rationalize that?
Is there a way that we can survive this cut and still be able to retain some people in the state, or are we going to start to see more people going? And I know it's all across government. It's not just higher ed.
Well, I think I'll take that one again, because there's nobody that is more disappointed that we have to take these budget cuts than those of us that I represent in higher education. Of course money matters. Of course business wants money just like higher education. And of course we compete for the dollar. But let's face it, we're in a recession. There are people that have no jobs whatsoever. We have to re-engineer the way that we prepare our people so that we can make sure that those who do come to us, we can find ways that we can reach students today so they can come out and create the jobs. We have faculty that are teaching students for jobs that have not yet been created because we expect them to create them when they get out. So the bottom line is, I am very upset that we have budget cuts, but I am also realistic that I have two choices. I can re-engineer, I can do things differently, but I'm not going to stop educating students. In fact, we've got a target to educate more.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. We're building a house right now, it sounds like, and we're starting up at the top and trying to put a roof up there without building a foundation. Have you ever been into one of those, into the inner cities, or one of those, the projects, and seen those kids in there and seen the way that they've lived? How are you going to go into at the lower level? Because do you agree with me that's where you need to start, is at the lower level? How are you going to do that?
Let me address that. I mentioned a three-legged stool as I started my comments a few moments ago. And unless we provide the early childhood education that's necessary, we will fail at all these things.
That's right.
You have hit the nail on the head. That is where it begins, early childhood development. 85% of the brain is developed by the time a child's 3 years old. By the time it's 3 years old, that's before they hit the LA4 program and other situations. So I'm here to tell you tonight that we have to shore up all of these, K through 12, early childhood development, technical community colleges, and four-year universities. And I'm here to say it has to be a top priority in this state. And it should be the top priority in this state. And I believe that we can fund it appropriately. And we might have to cut other things that are conveniences to us. But the facts are education is so important. It drives our future. And unless we make it the top priority and we fund it appropriately, then our state is doomed to failure.
Ron?
Got a couple of questions. I heard you talking about the online classes. I'm an EMT, and a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, they were playing around with some ideas of having a satellite EMT course where I went to a class, and they had a paramedic that was there in the class that wasn't my instructor. He was an assistant, but he was at that local school. And where the instructor was 30 miles away, 50 miles away, might have had 20 kids there. I was in a class with 20 kids, and in North Mountain, Louisiana, there was a class with 20 kids. And it worked off of the internet, where if I had a question in Thibodaux, I could ask the instructor in Morgan City or Monroe or wherever, and we all dialogued. We all went to class, but you only had to pay one instructor. Yeah. And a couple little, I guess, for lack of a better word, undergraduate to help out, and those were neat. I also have a question for you. Is that we said the lower income and impoverished folks, that's where we need to impact them. But do I want, no offense, I don't want y'all raising my kids. That's my job. God gave me my kids, and that's my job to raise them and nurture them and give them a work ethic and integrity and those things. And honestly, the majority of the kids today that come out of high school, most of them out of college, I don't want to work with them because they don't know how to work. And
can we change? I mean, can we do something with a technical system or some way to get more students in that transition? And so I know we're trying to push all of our kids to college, but I think Ronnie earlier was saying we need to maybe push some to other areas.
Well, I think that's what is one of the key things that's come out of the commission study and what Sally's been leading us in getting to, and that is we have lots of young people and older people going to school. They're not graduating. The best graduation rate we have is at 67%, and the worst is at 6% in an institution over a 6-year history. That's not acceptable. That is significantly below the Southern regional average, and we have to get that graduation rate up. How do you do it? You do what the commission has suggested. We move young people and those who are starting school into the community college system where they are focused on their core curriculum. Get that done and get that associate's degree out of the way, and then move to the 4-year school to deal with their majors and their professional classes and so forth. That's a more efficient way, both financially and historically in other states has increased graduation rates and helps us get toward our goal in 2015.
How do you intend to do that? I understand what you're saying, and I mean that sounds like it could be a good idea, but most high school students that graduate with the intention of going to college have their hearts set on a 4-year program. And I just want to know how you intend to tell students, well, maybe the 2-year program is better for you and maybe you should go to the 4-year program. How are you going to
The historical nature of that is here in Louisiana. In many, many states, kids go to 2-year schools before they go to 4-year schools. And the way you make that happen is by improving and increasing standards for admission. And we're going to see increasing admission standards across this state over the next several years, which will tell kids who don't meet those standards, I'm going to go to the 2-year school, get my core curriculum out of the way, and then I'll be able to automatically go to the 4-year school to get my professional classes out of the way.
Transitioning from a 2-year into a 4-year,
yes,
and your credits carrying
yes,
over with
and
you?
that's something that Senator Nevers did last year for the first time. What Sally was talking about earlier. If we have passed an articulation agreement bill. And articulation is a funny word that just means if I take a class in the 2-year school, it will go to a 4-year school.
What about
Mr. Clayton,
the playing field for the poor?
I think you were going to address that.
You know, I have to agree with Kathleen, and respectfully, my position is, as it relates to the 4-year institutions, particularly Southern, Grambling, LSU, A, and D, is that we take a rock out of the back door of cane field and polish it into a gym. In this state, the real problem is minorities. I mean, the minorities have to be brought up so that this state can come up to, you have to educate them, and we're not educating them. And until we educate them, then the entire state has a problem. Senator Nevers was talking about K through 12. Less than 50% of black males graduate from high school, and less than 10% of them go on to college. Well, Southern and Grambling and these other 4-year institutions have been doing it geographically, alluding to what Mr. Davis said. little locations, they've been educating them. Me, for example, I didn't score that high on the ACT test. And Southern gave me an opportunity, and now I think I'm a productive taxpayer. At least I know I'm a productive. I pay a lot of taxes. And if you're going to take a young Tony Clayton out of the backdoor cane fields of Louisiana, you're going to have some nurturing, Ms. Bertha, just as you alluded to earlier. You got to have that. And what Kathleen is talking about, my studies on the 2-year institutions is less than 10% of minorities transfer from 2 years to 4-year institutions. So if you're going to bring the industry here, the chemical plants, if you're going to bring the car manufacturers, are they going to come here without an educated workforce? If we're 30-some% of the population now minorities, the next 10 years will be 35, 40%, then guys, we better educate them. I mean, building more prisons for them is fine if they commit horrible crimes. But what happens to the ones that are not committing crimes, they're not educated, they're a drain on us.
And I know, Senator, and also, Ms. Pike, we have some research on that. We'll talk about.
Let me just say that part of the post-secondary education graduation rate problem is because of the students that are leaving our K through 12 system that are not prepared to go into a 4-year university setting. So, you know, there's numbers and numbers of those, and that's one of the reasons our graduation rates are so poor. But unless we address Andy's issue about how do we improve the numbers that are in our school system and allow them to become productive citizens, we will continue to build more prisons in this state, and we will continue to have more social programs. So we have to address the early childhood development stage, and we have to follow them all the way through the university or technical college or community college systems.
And Ms. Pike, is there some research that talks about how do we transition with these 2- and 4-year institutions?
Absolutely, and you know, there's a nationwide crisis of higher education budgeting right now, and education budgeting in general. The bright spot in all this is that it's forcing cooperation between the different levels. Certainly the High School Redesign Commission has been kicked into high gear to try to identify ways to provide services at the high school level that can transfer more easily to the 2-year college level. The articulation agreements have been forced so that pipeline between the 2-year schools and the 4-year schools is clearer. So if there's anything good that comes out of this, it's that new cooperations are being forced.
Press?
The Perk Commission made 22 recommendations. How many of those do you believe are realistic? And if you accept them, how long will it take to implement them? And how much will it cost?
I'll certainly try to address that. The 22 recommendations were recommendations that we think we need to discuss, talk about, and implement as quickly as possible. I can tell you that many of them it will take several years to implement, even more than that in some cases. But I think that discussion has to be held. It has to bring the Board of Regents, management boards, legislature, governor, and everyone together to talk about these issues and come up with the best possible plan we can to move education forward in this state. But I can tell you, as you look at those recommendations, you look at 7 months of work discussing everything we possibly could about post-secondary education, and we looked at what recommendations to make and at least start a thought process all across this state and a discussion process about what's best for education. And I really can't say in my legislative tenure that this has ever happened before, and it's good for our state.
Ms. Sher?
Yes, actually, I have 2 questions. The first one would be, I know earlier we referenced the statutory protections that we have, and I know none of us want to see cuts to higher education, obviously, and none of us want to see cuts to health care. Is it anything that you've considered looking at the, as of November 2009 report for the state statutory report was 1,868 pages. Is that something that you'll consider revisiting in order to allow more funding to higher education or allow more funding to health care? And then my second question is, last week we had a new forecast of an additional $84 million. Do you have any ideas of how you think that'll be distributed amongst healthcare and higher education?
Let me take that. The statutory dedications away from healthcare and higher education are vast and account for a lot of money being spent. And we do have multiple bills this year to review that and look at that issue again. Should we free up those constitutionally protected areas. Recognize, however, that many of those constitutionally protected areas are areas you and I believe ought to be protected. Like K-12 education is the largest; it's almost a third of the budget, and so, but it is protected. So we're going to get into those again and start looking, and because we're turning over every rock trying to find additional dollars to make this budget work. To follow up on your second question, the administration is looking right now at what the options are for this end of the year budget cut, and they're going to be. We will deal with it. We have to constitutionally. I don't think we'll borrow our way. In fact, I'm certain we won't borrow the money to get out of it. I think that would be a mistake. But we will look at where we can make year-end cuts and then also use other sources like maybe the rainy day fund or some other one-time monies to get us through this year.
Dolores?
Yes, I have a question in reference to the 4-year college and 2-year. I understand well, and minority, I have a son that's graduating this year, by the way, and he's got a 4-year college is what he would love to go to. I understand what you said about 2-year, but it's so many minority they do not know about ACT as far as how old or when should they start going to take the ACT test. So I want to know about the, you said quality, they will be qualified. What certain qualities they have for that 2-year college?
Well, I think, I'm sorry. You finished? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, well, I'm all for the 4-year college, though, but I can understand what you're saying about 2-year.
Right.
I would prefer that.
And I think we'll have different levels of admission for the different 4-year schools. It won't be all the flagship high-end requirements to get in. There will be different tiers of requirements that you can still go to the 4-year schools. Mm-hmm. But if you don't meet any of those, then you really should go to the 2-year schools because you'll be able to get your core curriculum out of the way at a lower price, probably closer to where you live, and be able to move through that quicker because of the course selection and so forth in the 2-year schools. Well, I think this is something we're trying. We are out of balance in Louisiana. We are upside down to other states. 60% of our people who start in school start in the 4-year schools, and 40% go to the 2-year schools. That's the exact opposite, as I remember the commission saying. Right. Across the rest of the South. And so those are the things we have to do, and we have to make sure that the course selection at the 2-year schools is broad enough and deep enough to accommodate all of those folks.
And it's very important that we engage the student at the level they are when they enter post-secondary education. And our technical community college system has to be geared up so that happens. And of course, backing up to the counselors in our high school and all the other people that will know exactly what's required to do certain things, or to become a welder, or to become a physician, whatever it might be, whatever you would like to go into. You're going to know exactly what's required of you. And that's required in the legislation we passed, articulation and transfer legislation, which Dr. Clausen is implementing and has done a fabulous job, her and the Board of Regents Management Board, in bringing that forward. The real key to all of this is to maintain the quality of our post-secondary education system through all this. And that's why the faculty was engaged at every university and across our state to actually determine what the criteria is for English 101. And what would be required of someone taking that course in a community college or either dually enrolled in a high school. So we're working trying to engage the student.
And we only have a couple more minutes, but at the beginning of the show we asked some questions about TOPS. And I'm surprised that nobody had a question about that at the end. And so we only have a couple of seconds actually. Can we change TOPS to make it more need-based, or is that something that's probably going to be off the table?
I think the question is, should we change TOPS? Okay. And TOPS right now is a contract between the student and the state. And we need to honor that for kids who have been working hard for the last 4 years and are in the process now of making sure that obligation is met on the state's part. It's $130 million a year. About $30 million of that is paid for out of the trust fund. So there's about $90 to $100 million left that comes out of the general fund. I think overall the legislature firmly supports TOPS because it has been able to make college affordable for many, many young people who wouldn't have had it before. And I'm not in favor of changing the criteria for TOPS. That was something that's been looked at, because if we do, you will be particularly hitting minority students, and that is not a good idea. That's going back to somebody's point. That's the exact group we need to make sure is advancing faster to catch up. And so I hope we leave TOPS just like it is and continue to fund it fully.
Well, we've got a contract to get off the air. And so, unfortunately, we've run out of time. But I want to thank our panelists, Mr. Tucker, Dr. Clausen, Mr. Nevers, and Ms. Pike, and Mr. Clayton. And so when we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
Well, Craig, we certainly have an intensity of interest about higher education.
We do. We talked about this before the show, in the middle of the show, and I'm sure after the show. And so there's a lot to talk about and a lot of solutions that we can hopefully find.
And we hope the audience continues talking to us online because we care about what they think.
Exactly.
Right?
When you use technology.
Absolutely. But that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to take this month's survey and view expanded interviews from our backgrounder by visiting us at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, give us your feedback on tonight's show. We'd love to hear from you, like we did from several viewers of last month's program on the state's Race to the Top application, including its requirements for teacher performance pay. Jean says merit pay based on student achievement of benchmark testing or other performance tests is not an appropriate way to judge student performance today. Tricia wrote, I don't see why performance pay, makes Race to the Top a bad thing. And Bridget says we need a complete overhaul of the Louisiana public school system because it is riddled with incompetency from the top down. Well, major reform may be coming. Since our show aired, Louisiana has been named one of 16 finalists for a share of the $4 billion Race to the Top federal dollars.
Gridlock, party politics, and a lack of bipartisanship. Is representative democracy in Washington broken? And if so, what's the collateral damage to Louisiana? Join us next month as Are We Destroying Politics with Democracy? Thanks for watching, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org. Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.